Welcome to the HMO Property Show, by investors for investors. Brought to you by the HMO Property Co, Australia's leaders in impact investing. Investments made with the intention to generate a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a positive financial return. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host, Neil Gibb, and today I've got Mr. Matt Garmany from Garmany Valuations coming in to speak to us. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Neil.
A lot of people are reaching out to me. The valuations work on the HMO and the NDIS investment properties. And instead of me trying to fluff my way through it and try and explain, I thought I'll just bring the expert in.
Okay.
And we'll share it all with the listeners.
That sounds good.
It's a very interesting sort of space at the minute, the HMO and NDIS space. We were just having a little chat prior, and 12 months ago, this lending product didn't exist. And we were going to the Westpacs and the Commonwealth banks, and we were getting like 50 and 60% LVRs, and there was a shortfall in the valuations. And then when the two lenders came out in the market, they said, we'll do a residential lending package, but a commercial valuation.
Yeah, that's
interesting.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah.
We've seen an increase in instructions over the last 12 months, but we've sort of been doing these valuations probably for the last 24 months. It's quite new to WA.
Yep.
The NDIS market on the East Coast has been around for a few more years, but it's quite new in the WA market.
It is, mate, and it's exciting. It's been a game changer for the business because now people can access 80 and 90% LVRs from the banks because the valuations at the front end are stacking up, and we're going to dig into these and work out how they are stacking up and why they are stacking up. But I think it's important that people actually understand who Matt Garmany is.
Okay.
How did you get into valuations, Matt?
I grew up with valuations. My father was a valuer, and he started the business back in 1984.
There you go.
So, and I got into the industry about 10 years later in 1994.
Yep.
To become a valuer, you need to go to university and get a bachelor degree majoring in property.
How long does that take?
That's a 3-year degree.
3 years, yeah.
But then to get your actual valuations license, you've got to spend 2 years doing practical experience with a licensed valuer, and then you've got to sit a further exam, oral and written exam, to get your land valuer's license in WA.
Yep. So you worked with Dad.
Worked with him for a while, went into town for 5 or 6 years and got broader experience.
Into town? Whereabouts are you from?
No, in Perth,
right.
For one of the larger national valuation companies.
Gotcha.
Doing commercial, industrial and land subdivision valuations. And then I came back and sort of started taking over in 2003.
Beautiful. And I'm guessing there's ongoing sort of, like in the real estate industry, we have CPD points where we have to jump in every year and do a certain amount of educational components to keep our points up to date. Is that the similar thing with the valuation industry?
Yeah, so we're members of the Australian Property Institute, which requires us to have 20 CPD points per year, which is good, and that's across a variety of sort of risk management and property specialised programs that they provide. I'm also a licensed real estate agent as well, so I've got to get a further 10 points through the Department of Mines, Industry and Regulation.
Yep. So you're going to Rewa, do the CPD points? And
I do.
Yeah, cool. There's actually some really good courses there, isn't there?
There are.
Yep.
There are. It's a good reminder of what you need to be doing, and some of the the issues that are involved in the industry.
Yeah, and it's constantly changing as well, isn't it?
It is, like everything in life.
Yes, yeah. We've recently seen big changes to all the strata laws as well. That's been big change.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was one of the lead representatives for the Australian Property Institute on the strata reform process, which sort of went through probably from about 2013 through to when it was sort of enacted in 2021.
Yeah, cool.
So it was a very long process. Our institute had quite a lot of input into some of the changes, which I think will benefit the property industry.
Do you want to give us a bit of an overview of what them changes are?
Some of the changes in the strata laws that we were involved with were around how unit entitlements are assessed. So that's your proportion of ownership. And previously there was some uncertainty as to how these unit entitlements were to be assessed and whether you take into consideration the level of fit out and finish for each of the units within a complex. But when you've got 80, 90, 100 units in one complex, if you take into consideration the individual level of fit out and finish for each unit at the time of doing the unit entitlement assessment, that can change within a couple of weeks. I had an example of one where there was 90 units in a complex. I inspected the property and it was a dispute. I inspected the property. 2 of the units were being fully renovated, so the kitchens and the bathrooms were gutted. There was nothing there. And then when the valuer for the other side went back and inspected the property, they'd finished the renovations. So we said to the State Administrative Tribunal member, which way do we do it? Who's correct? And so part of that reform process, the API eliminated that issue by saying that the unit entitlement needs to be based on a standard level of fit out and finish.
Right.
Similar to what units are, when they're first constructed, they're all of a similar level of fit out and finish, and therefore there's no issue with renovations. So that was one of the major changes that influenced our industry.
Beautiful. Well done.
Yeah.
I had no idea that you were involved in that, so there you go.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We touched on qualifications there, haven't we, and what we need to do to maintain them. And with you being in the real estate industry as well, have you actually acted as a real estate agent, or is that something you did on the side to complement what you do with the valuation side of things?
I first got my real estate sales rep's licence as part of the degree that I did at Curtin. But through our business, we do a lot of consultancy for clients, so where we assist them with the sale process, or we assist them with purchasing properties. So we currently don't actively put a sign up and say this property's for sale and do home opens or sell office units or whatever. But through that process of providing advice and assisting people through the process who may not have a full understanding of the industry, or they just want someone with independent expert advice to hold their hand through the process, we sort of cross the line as to are we being a valuer or are we being a sales rep or consultant. So I've got that license just to just as an additional qualification and
bit of a backup.
A bit of a backup.
Sometimes you need a separate wallet for all your different licenses that you carry as well, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of certificates on the wall for different things.
Yeah.
So.
Seems that adding up, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've got 2 different ways of valuations. We've got the standard residential property valuation, and we've got the commercial property valuations as well.
Yes.
Give us a little bit of a rundown on how a residential property valuation is calculated.
So a residential house is generally what we call we use a direct comparison approach, similar to what you would do when you're looking at buying a property. So we try and put ourselves in the position of the average purchaser.
Yep.
And what they do is they'll go around and they might get a bit of research off their local agent and find out what the property down the road is sold for. So we will do the same thing. We probably go into a little bit more detail with our comparisons on land areas and locational factors, and then we look at the size, quality, age, and presentation of the improvements, and we sort of dive a little bit deeper in looking at our adjustments for the various factors. But at the end of the day, we're comparing the property we're valuing with the recent sales in the immediate locality. So
is it worth somebody, if they're thinking about selling their property, is it worth them doing a cosmetic renovation, for instance, new carpets, new paint, to increase the value of the property?
Look, most of the time, yes. A presentation does help. And in a market, in a slow market where people are, there's less buyers out there, then you want to make your property stand out from the other one around the corner that's for sale.
Yep.
And making it easier for someone to move straight into, and they don't have to do much work, or something that they can rent out readily, easily, is probably more appealing. But there can be instances where you can go over the top and overcapitalise and spend too much. So it's a bit of a fine line. Depends on if the property is, if it's got development potential, well then you really need to consider, is spending the money going to be worthwhile, or would maybe a developer might come along and demolish the current improvements to put two new ones on there.
Correct.
So it's a case by case basis.
Yep. Yeah, nice. You touched on the zoning of land there as well. Can the zoning of land affect the valuation of a property?
Definitely.
Yep.
So you might have two properties with a similar size land area. One has got duplex development potential and one doesn't. Because the zoning's different. They'll appeal to different market sectors. So the one that doesn't have any development potential will probably appeal to an owner-occupier or an investor that wants to just rent it out, whereas the one with redevelopment potential may appeal to developers or builders.
And that would come back to when we're talking about doing the cosmetic renovation or not. The one with the development potential, we might not actually do the cosmetic renovation on that one, but the one without it, we may do it to increase its value.
Correct.
Yeah. And as a valuer, can you see past the cracks of a bit of a shoddy
renovation?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, we go through and we can see whether the person's painted it themselves.
Yep.
Or they might have done a few home renovations, which you can see isn't the same as engaging a professional to do it. So, and buyers will see that as well.
Yeah, because like you said, you put yourself in the buyer's shoes.
Yes.
And look for all these things that the buyer would look for as well.
And we hopefully go sort of a little bit further and, can identify areas, there might be some cracking or rising damp because the shower's leaking or things like that. So we'll go through and identify the areas that may be of some concern. We do a lot of pre-sale and pre-purchase valuations. So where, if, for instance, a pre-sale valuation, the owner might be getting some different feedback from the local real estate agents, and they just want that independent opinion on value, and we'll come in and do our independent assessment, provide them with a report, which will include the sales evidence that we've used in arriving at the value, and provide justification on how and why we have arrived at that value. So whoever reads the report can get a full understanding of, what the valuer was thinking.
What about location and proximity to good amenity?
That location definitely comes into it. So we try and compare properties in a similar location. There can be suburbs that might have a major road running through it. Let's say Como around the corner, for instance. You've got the Como beach side of Canning Highway, and you have the river side of Canning Highway. We try and, if we're valuing a property on one of those sides, we'll try and stick to that same side because the Canning Highway sort of provides a bit of a geographical boundary.
Bit of noise as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and like you mentioned there, if the property is on a busier road or opposite a freeway or close to a train line, we try and compare properties that have those similar locational factors.
And just before we hit record on the podcast as well, you said after this you're going home, going back to the office to write a heap of reports.
Yes.
How long does it take to actually do the physical inspection? And then how long does it take to compile a report afterwards?
The physical inspection can take anywhere between 10-15 minutes through to half to 3/4 of an hour, depending on the size of the building, whether we have floor plans or not. If we don't have floor plans, we'll generally run a tape measure around the outside or a laser to get the building area. And if it's a 2-story property, well, that takes a bit longer as well.
Yep, great, good stuff. Commercial vals, what's the difference between a commercial valuation and a residential valuation?
Well, commercial valuation can be purchased for a greater variety of reasons, and also for a lot different uses. So if we're looking at an industrial building, for instance, the industrial building might be purchased by an owner-occupier, but it also might be purchased by an investor for the rental return. So we've got to factor in a few more different ways of looking at it and to arrive at the value. So with commercial valuations, we'll quite often look at one on a direct comparison, similar to the residential. But in some circumstances, like, let's say, industrial buildings, that direct comparison is a lot more difficult, because there's generally quite often nothing that's directly comparable. The land size could be different, the size and age and condition of the buildings could be different. There could be other factors like hard stands and gantry cranes that we've got to take into consideration, and the same applies to office buildings and retail shops. And then if you get into specialist property types, well, then there's a whole different ball game.
And HMO and NDIS falls into specialist?
Look, I think they do.
Yeah.
They're not your standard residential property, and the NDIS in particular has a significantly higher rental return when compared to a standard residential property.
Yes. Before we dig into how the HMO and NDIS vals are put together, with the commercial vals, we've got a cap rate valuation.
Yes.
How does that work?
So the capitalisation approach is a way of assessing what return the investor will receive. So with a commercial property, they'll get a rental income, and we break that down into the total rental, which we call a gross rental. There's an outgoings component, which sometimes is paid for by the owner and sometimes is recouped from the tenant. So there's the property outgoings, and then if you deduct the outgoings from the gross rental, you work back to what they call a net rental value. So what's the net return to the investor? And what we do is we analyse the sales that have occurred, look to see what the net rental amount the owners are achieving on those comparable sales, and that will give you what we call a yield or a capitalisation rate.
Yep.
So the return on the property. So when we're assessing the value on a commercial property using the capitalisation approach, we generally capitalise the net rental that the property is achieving at an appropriate capitalisation rate, which is based on analysing comparable sales to see what their capitalisation rates or yields are.
And can that cap rate vary depending on how hot and cold the market is?
It varies on depending on how the conditions on the market, but it also varies depending on the type of property as well, and the location and the size of the property. So if you've got a large property that's a $10 million multi-tenanted retail shop or something, that has less risk than, let's say, a specialised industrial building that might be a cold storage facility, which has a narrower market for your rental, your tenants, and therefore has a bit more risk. So that rental return or cap rate will be higher than something that has less risk.
So the lower the cap rate, the higher the property value.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. That's a weird one to get your head around, isn't it?
It is.
So if something's got an 8% cap rate and something's got a 6% cap rate, the 6% cap rate, if the net income was the same, would give the property a higher value.
Correct.
Yeah. Woo. Right, so we've got the gross income, which is the total rent collected.
Yes.
Then we've got the outgoings that go out to let's say the tenant doesn't pay it, so we've got gas, water, electric, and then council rates.
Council rates, land tax, insurance.
Yep. That leaves us with the net income.
Correct.
Now, do we factor lending into that, or do we do it without lending?
No, we don't factor any
no
lending, because everyone's lending situation is different.
Yeah, so we do it on an unencumbered basis.
Yes.
And then give it that percentage variation.
Correct.
Yeah, cool, awesome. What about like replacement costs on these as well? Do we factor that into the valuation in any way?
For the lenders, they always like to have a recommended replacement cost.
Yep.
So what we do is work out what we believe it would cost to replace the improvements. Now, we do that by reference to recent building contracts that we're aware of similar properties, from valuations that we've done for ones that are on completion, and we also refer to construction cost manuals.
Right. Okay, that's it. Yeah. So if you've got, for instance, a store underneath, like a cafe or something underneath an apartment block,
yes,
compared to a totally standalone 3-level office block, sorry.
Yes.
The as if to replace would be totally different on that. Would you have to factor in the construction above it as well in the way of the apartments? Or?
So with insurance, the insurance of a strata title building, you generally the insurance is generally over the whole building, and then the apportionment of the insurance fees or the cost to insure it is apportioned through the relevant lots or the owners within the building. If we're doing a standalone property, then the replacement costs will vary depending on the type of building it is and the type and size of construction.
Yeah.
So that's the base replacement cost to build. But when you're looking at insuring the property, you need to take into consideration demolition and removal of debris, because we've got to assume, worst case scenario, that the property burns down and has to be demolished and rebuilt.
Yep.
So we factor in the cost to rebuild it, the demolition and removal of debris. We factor in some professional fees, because you might need to get an architect in to rebuild or design it and manage the construction. We also factor in a cost escalation. So you might insure the property on the 1st of January and it burns down on the 31st of December. And as we know, in recent times, building costs have gone through the roof. So we've got to factor in a cost escalation over that 1 year insured period.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not just the bare replacement cost, it's the demolition and removal of debris, professional fees, and cost escalation over the insured period.
Right. What about CPI? Do we factor that into it as well?
That's part of that cost escalation.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Great. What about HMO and NDIS properties? How are these ones valued? Because, like we touched on at the start, it's still a residential lending package by the lender, but we've got this commercial valuation at the front end. So, how is the value of these properties calculated nowadays?
Well, these properties are generally purchased by investors, so they're looking at the rental return. With NDIS properties, the rent is basically funded by the government, and the rental amount is significantly higher than what you'd achieve for a similar residential property.
Yep.
So people who are buying these properties are buying it for the rental return. So we're looking at it from a capitalisation of rental income.
Mm-hmm.
The way we assess the NDIS properties is we look at how many participants can occupy the home, and there's tables on the NDIS website to say, well, what's the maximum amount of rental return that the government will pay per participant.
Mm-hmm.
So we factor that into in it. There's other things that we factor into the rental, or assessing the rental, is the design category. And the highest design category at the moment is the high physical support, which we might touch on a bit later on.
Mm-hmm.
And then we sort of go through other things like locational factors, and it gives you what the rental will be paid by the government for that property.
And that'd be the gross income, yeah?
That'll be the gross income.
Yep.
So then from the gross income, we, like a commercial property, we've got to go through and deduct the likely outgoings. So that'll be your rates, taxes, insurance. We also factor in a management cost and property management and allowance for vacancy.
Mm-hmm. What vacancy do we add into NDIS?
So it depends on the number of participants. What we've found with speaking to providers and looking at what the market's prepared to pay on a rental is that we generally factor in about a 10% vacancy for an NDIS property with 2 participants.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the participants, it generally takes a little bit longer for the providers to fill the vacant space with the participants. They've got to find a participant that's happy for that to be in that location and that property. And it's a narrower market, so you don't have as many people as you would looking for a standard residential house.
Yep.
But what we've found is if there's more than 2 participants, that the vacancy rate goes up.
Interesting.
Significantly. And talking to providers, we've found that if there's 3 participants in a house, or the house has potential for 3 participants, quite often the other participants, they don't want to share their space, or the property might not be big enough to allow for 3 participants in the family room at one time, which may put off some people wanting to live there. So we factor in a 30%
wow, big jump.
allowance, a vacancy.
That's a big jump.
It is.
Yeah.
So what we've found is the difference between having 2 participants in a dwelling that has the ability for 3 participants. A 2-participant dwelling has a similar net rental return as a 3-participant dwelling because we factor in that additional vacancy factor.
Yeah, interesting.
But the cost to build a 3-participant dwelling is substantially higher than a 2-participant dwelling. So, in some circumstances, it may not be the highest and best use to go to the higher, spend more money on the building cost because your returns generally a bit lower on the 2-participant dwelling.
Yep. What about 4-bedder? What vacancy do you factor in for them ones? Do you see many 4-bedders getting built? We
haven't seen too many 4-bedders in WA.
Just 2s and 3s.
Just generally 2s and 3s.
Yeah.
And they're generally standalone houses rather than being within apartment complexes.
Yep.
I understand and know that the market on the East Coast, there's more apartment complexes or properties with 2, 3 and 4 participants per dwelling. But over here in WA, majority of the properties that we've valued have been standalone houses or villa units and have had 2 or 3 participants.
So when we factored in the gross income takeaway, property management fees, insurance, and the other bits and bobs, vacancy, for instance,
yes.
What cap rate percentage are we adding to that net income for NDIS? So
the evidence that we've analysed, the cap rate range for 2 and 3 bedroom or participant dwellings in WA is sort of ranging between 9 and 10%. Cool. There's a couple a little bit below, and there's a couple sort of a little bit higher than that, but generally between 9 and 10% return, which is significantly higher than a residential property, which you might get a 3 to 4% net return.
So we can see why there's more investors moving into this space now, because you're getting a higher return. Higher return,
but higher return does also equal higher risk.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in the way of volume coming through? How many valuations are you doing in the NDIS space at the minute?
We're probably getting anywhere sort of between 6 and 12 per month.
Yep. Cool.
Across the Perth metro area and also down in Bunbury.
Okay. Excellent. And what are we seeing in the way of HMO? Are the valuations calculated the same for the HMO as well? Or co-living, should we call it?
Yeah, co-living or HMO properties, we approach them on a similar way that we do for the NDIS. Obviously, the rental is based on what rental income you can achieve per room.
Yep.
And we look at that through, basically direct comparison on other rentals, that are leased on a room-by-room basis.
How do you find that information? Because it's not like someone's out there tracking it like REWA or someone like that, is it?
No. So we use our contacts in the industry.
Yep.
People like yourself and other co-living providers and property managers, and we sort of look to see what the market's willing to pay.
Fantastic. And then when we consider the net income from an NDIS versus a HMO, we touched on we need to factor in council rates, water rates, insurance and property management in the NDIS space. But as a HMO operator, we're also factoring in gas, water, electric, internet, cleaners. So the net income on a HMO compared to an NDIS is a little bit different, isn't it?
Yes. So you're looking at the HMO is sort of like a fully gross rental, where, as you said, electricity, gas, water is paid for by the landlord. So you've got to take off that to come back to your net rent. When you're looking at your returns, you've just got to make sure that you're comparing like with like. So if your sales you've analysed, you're taking into consideration deducting an amount for electricity, water, gas and the other utilities, then you've got to do that with your comparisons and the property you're valuing.
Yeah.
So as long as you're comparing or analysing it the same way, then you can either include that or leave those costs off.
And what sort of vacancy do we factor in for co-living?
Probably not quite as high as the as the 3 participant dwelling on for the NDIS, but we'd probably assume that there might be a 4-week vacancy per room per annum.
Yeah, cool. That's kind of what we factor into our numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, I think at the minute though, we're seeing something totally different with the new builds. Like we're seeing people queuing up to rent these things. So
the market's pretty hot at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's probably a bit of a benefit.
Yeah.
But we sort of try and look at it on a bit more of a long-term basis, and we're assuming that the rental market in Perth will stabilise over time.
When do you think that will be?
Your guess is as good
Put you
as
on the
mine.
spot there.
It's look, we do have a rental shortage at the moment, and with construction costs and construction time frames, construction costs being so high and the time frame to build being a lot longer than what is normal, I think the rental market will be pretty tight for the short to medium term until we can get some investors back in there to build properties that will be purchased for residential investment.
And that's the problem, you see, because the construction costs are so high, the rents are still relatively low compared to, and then we're only seeing like between 3 and 5% yield. So people aren't exactly piling back in to start building stuff at the minute, are they? No.
So, and look, I think the government is trying everything they can to, incentivise people. Apart from
that's what caused the problem, wasn't it?
But there's been the government's trying to build properties themselves, but the incentive for owners, in my opinion, over the last 5 years to have investment properties has probably declined, and a lot of private investors have got out of the residential market because there's not a great incentive to do so.
Unless you're in the higher yielding categories of co-living and NDIS.
Correct.
Yeah. How big do you see the market for the co-living compared to the NDIS?
I think the co-living's currently. I don't think there's a huge market over here in WA, but it's got potential to really expand and have semi-professional companies provide these products to the rental market.
And one thing we didn't touch on there, we touched on the cap rate that you apply at the NDIS being between 9 and 10%. Because the net income is lower on HMO, what cap rate are you applying to them ones?
We're generally about sort of halfway between the NDIS and a standard residential home, so we're probably around the 6.5%, 6 to 7%.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful. And how many co-living how many co-living valuations are you doing per month?
We haven't been doing that many, probably sort of maybe one a month.
Yeah.
So we're expecting that part of the market to probably increase as well.
It's coming.
But it's probably also going to depend on the interest from the banks and what their willingness is to lend on that sort of, again, specialised product.
Yeah, it's been a few curveballs that we've had to kind of work around and strategise through. And interest rates is one, speed of construction and cost of construction is another. With the cost of construction, because you're in the coalface looking at bill contracts and stuff like that on a daily basis, are you seeing them still increase? Are you seeing them plateau? Are they coming back down?
I think they have, from what we're seeing, they have reached their peak.
Yeah.
And in some sectors of the construction market, the costs have come down. I think the cost for bricklayers has come down. But there's sort of, from what when we're speaking to builders, there are areas, some areas where the construction costs for that particular part of the building is still quite high, and it's a supply and demand factor.
You also mentioned that you're doing some work down in the southwest.
Yes.
Is that like Bustleton, Dunsborough, Bunbury sort of regions?
We've been doing a few NDIS valuations down in the Bunbury area.
Yep.
So there's that part of the market. There's a demand for the accommodation there. The government, or the NDIS government website, provides some information on the supply and demand for NDIS properties in different regions of WA and the whole of Australia. So it gives you a bit of a gauge on what the supply and demand is in that location.
What I'll do at the end of this podcast for the people that are listening as well, I'll put the NDIS link in there so people can actually track that as well.
Yes.
What are you seeing in the way of construction prices down there compared to construction prices in Perth Metro? Is there any difference? Look,
there is a slight increase in construction prices in regional locations. It's just sort of transporting the materials down to, let's say, Bunbury, for instance, costs more than the Perth Metro area. So there is a slight increase.
Yep.
But quite often the land values are a little bit cheaper as well.
Yeah, kind of balances itself back out, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What about trades down there? Do you think there's access to trades? Do you think that's an issue, that's increasing prices?
I think that's across the board at the moment.
Yeah. Well, what do we do? We've got this massive shortage of accommodation right now. The migration tap's back on. People are coming back into the country. Who do we bring first? Do we bring the doctors, the nurses, the teachers, the people to support the infrastructure growth? Or do we bring the tradies, the brickies, the plasterers, the plumbers, the sparkies to build the accommodation for these people to live in?
I think we need both. You need to have the population increase to spur on the market to build more accommodation, but there's a time lag in the construction process, and we're currently looking at 18 months, 2 years for a residential house. So that's the difficult part. Unfortunately, because of pandemics and other things that have occurred over the last 24, 36 months. We do have a lack of accommodation in the Perth Metro area.
I was reading the REWA stats earlier. I'm addicted to reading them at the minute because I just love seeing the numbers could fluctuate. But we're probably sitting around 1,700 properties available for rent. And of them, I think 600 of them were units. So there's literally like 1,200 houses available for rent on the market. And then in the sales side of things, we've got under 8,000 properties. I think it was like 7,800. Yep. And I think 3,800 of them are houses. Yes. The rest of the units are blocks of land. Yeah.
And I think the equilibrium is around 11,000, 12,000.
That's what the class as a healthy market, yeah.
As a healthy market.
Yeah, and then obviously we've been well and truly over that. Let's
Yes.
go back 2012, I think, the vacancy. Oh, that's probably when it started tapering off. So
Yes.
2014, vacancy rate was around 7%.
Yep.
And on the market, I think we had like 17 to 18,000 properties.
Yeah, so things took a lot longer to sell, and properties had to be priced right.
So now we're looking at the other end of the spectrum, where people are queuing up literally around the corner to get access to houses. I seen someone put something on Facebook or some social media platform the other day. They were driving down the road and they were just driving past this queue of people that were queuing up to get access to a property for rent.
Yes, yeah, it's quite it's quite sad, really.
It is
that it's got to that point.
It is,
and properties that are on the market for sale, quite often the local real estate agents don't put a price on there because they're not sure what people are wanting to pay. Some people are, and if there is a price on it, people are coming in making offers over the asking price.
And how does that affect the valuation done by someone like yourself? Let's say properties on the market and compared to other properties in that market, it's worth $600,000. But Paul and Sue, they've missed out on 5 of the properties now. They've got the fear of missing out,
Yes.
and they've put in an offer $100,000 more for that property, even though it's only worth $600K. How does that affect the valuation from your standpoint?
Well, we try and take into consideration the most recent sales that have occurred in a area, and with the comparable sales that we're looking at, we'll factor in what the market's been doing since that sale. So we'll take into consideration changes in the market. It does make it difficult if someone's basically setting the new price for the area, and that's that's not going to be shown in any evidence. Valuation is an exact science. It's a professional opinion based on fact, and when there's multiple factors that are coming into the market, people buying properties and spending $50,000 or $100,000 over asking price, it does make it difficult to factor that in.
Is it becoming a bit of a common occurrence out there at the minute? People paying well and truly over the odds?
Yes.
Wow, Matt, appreciate your time. Before we go, I'd like to ask this question. If you had $1 million to invest, what would you invest in and why?
Well, look, if you're investing in property, you're either going to look at your rental return or capital growth. I think the market's probably getting towards the upper end of the market in the residential side of things. I think it's sort of getting close to that in the industrial market. So you're probably not going to get a great deal of capital growth in the short to medium term. So I'd probably push more on the rental return side of things. And as I said, if you look at the NDIS and you're getting between 9 and 10% return, that's pretty healthy.
Cash flow is king.
Cash flow is king.
Cash flow is king. Matt, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure catching up.
No worries. Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you stay up to date with all the cash flow positive property updates.